The rain fell in sheets across the muddy compound, each drop striking the tin roofs of the barracks with a rhythm that had become as familiar as breathing. Corporal Sarah Brennan stood at the edge of the motor pool, her boots sinking slightly into the soft earth, watching the mechanics work under the yellow glow of hanging lamps that swayed in the wind. It was November 1944, somewhere in northeastern France, and the war had carved itself into everything she saw, every face, every gesture, every silence between words. She wasn't supposed to be here. Women weren't supposed to be anywhere near the front lines. Not officially, not in ways that mattered to the men who made decisions in rooms far from the sound of artillery. But the Women's Army Corps had proven useful enough to be tolerated, essential enough to be ignored when convenient. And Sarah had learned to move through that contradiction like water finding its way through stone. The photograph unit had sent her to document supply operations, a safe assignment, something appropriate for a woman with a camera. Take pictures of trucks being loaded, soldiers smiling as they received mail, the occasional officer shaking hands with a local mayor. Clean images for newspapers back home, proof that the war was organized, purposeful, winnable. She had done this work for 8 months now, and she had become very good at seeing what she was supposed to see. But Sarah had also learned to see what lived in the spaces between official narratives, in the glances that men exchanged when they thought no one was watching, in the manifests that didn't quite match the cargo, in the supply requisitions that arrived with numbers carefully adjusted in fresh ink. She had learned that war created shadows, and in those shadows, things happened that no one wanted illuminated. It started with something small, something she almost dismissed. A Tuesday morning, cold enough to see your breath, and she was photographing a convoy preparing to move supplies to a field hospital 20 miles east, standard procedure. She was adjusting her lens, trying to capture the way morning light caught the Red Cross markings on the trucks, when she noticed the angle was wrong. The trucks sat lower on their axles than they should, the suspension compressed under weight that medical supplies wouldn't create. She had grown up in her father's garage in Pennsylvania, had spent her childhood watching him assess vehicles with a mechanic's intuition, understanding how a truck should sit, how it should sound, how it should move under load. These trucks were carrying something heavy, something dense, and medical supplies were many things, but heavy wasn't one of them. Sarah lowered her camera and watched as 2 sergeants supervised the loading, their voices low, their movements efficient and deliberate. There was nothing obviously wrong, nothing she could point to and say definitively that something was off. But the feeling settled in her chest like a stone, solid and unmovable, the kind of knowing that comes before proof. She took the photograph anyway, capturing the convoy from an angle that showed the compressed suspension, the way the truck settled into the mud. It was barely noticeable unless you knew what you were looking for, unless you understood the language of weight and balance and mechanical stress. She marked it in her log as convoy documentation, routine work, and moved on to photograph a group of infantrymen writing letters home. 3 days later, she saw another convoy, this one marked for ammunition transport to artillery units near the Belgian border. Again, the same compression, the same heavy settling, the same careful supervision by sergeants who seemed more concerned with secrecy than efficiency. She photographed it from multiple angles, adjusting her position to capture the way the truck sat in relation to the ground, the slight bulge in the canvas coverings, the extra security detail that seemed unusual for standard ammunition loads. That evening, in the small room she shared with 3 other WAC members, she developed the photographs in the makeshift darkroom they had created in a storage closet. The images emerged slowly in the chemical baths, gray shapes becoming defined, shadows revealing details that the naked eye might miss. She hung them on a line to dry, studying them in the red glow of the safety light, and something cold moved through her stomach. The pattern was there, undeniable once you knew to look for it. Convoys marked for medical supplies, for ammunition, for general equipment, all carrying something that made them sit heavy and low, all supervised with the same careful attention, all moving at odd hours when fewer people were around to notice. She counted 17 convoys over the past 6 weeks, all following the same pattern, all documented in her routine photographs, because she had learned to see from angles that revealed rather than concealed. Sarah sat on her bunk that night, listening to the other women sleep, their breathing soft and steady in the darkness. She knew what she should do. She should report her observations through proper channels, file a formal inquiry, trust that the system would investigate and address whatever irregularities existed. That was the correct procedure, the safe path, the one that kept a female corporal in her place and out of trouble. But she had been in the army long enough to understand that proper channels had a way of absorbing information that contradicted official narratives, that inconvenient observations from inconvenient sources often disappeared into bureaucratic silence. She was a woman with a camera, useful for morale, photographs, and human interest stories, not for questioning supply operations that had the quiet blessing of someone with enough rank to make questions go away. She made a decision that night, one that felt both reckless and inevitable. She would document everything, build an undeniable record, photograph the pattern from every angle until the evidence was too comprehensive to ignore or dismiss. It was probably foolish. It was almost certainly dangerous. But something in her, something that had survived her father's early death, and her mother's quiet strength, and her own journey from a small Pennsylvania town to the mud of France, refused to look away. The next morning, she requested additional film stock for a project documenting supply operations, a comprehensive record of how materials moved from depot to front line. Her commanding officer, a distracted captain who barely looked up from his paperwork, approved the request with a signature and a dismissive wave. Within 2 days, she had enough film to document a month of operations. She began to move differently through the compound, finding reasons to be near the motor pool at odd hours, photographing from positions that seemed casual but were carefully calculated to reveal the details that mattered. She learned the schedule of convoy departures, the names of the sergeants who supervised the loading, the patterns of when and where these heavy shipments moved. She kept 2 sets of logs, one official and one private, and she stored the revealing photographs in a locked box under her bunk, wrapped in oilcloth against the perpetual dampness. 3 weeks into her private investigation, she was photographing a routine supply delivery when she overheard a conversation that changed everything. 2 sergeants stood near an idling truck, their voices low but carrying in the cold air. One of them was frustrated, gesturing sharply as he spoke. She couldn't hear everything, but certain words cut through clearly. Black market, Belgian contacts, officers taking their cut, enough profit to retire on after the war. Sarah's hands didn't shake as she adjusted her camera, but something inside her went very still and very cold. This wasn't about supplies being diverted for military use, wasn't about logistical irregularities or accounting errors. This was theft on a massive scale, systematic and organized, protected by rank and enabled by the chaos of war. Medical supplies, ammunition, equipment meant for soldiers who needed them, all being sold to black market contacts, while official records were carefully falsified to hide the losses. She photographed the sergeants from an angle that captured their faces, their rank insignia, the truck behind them with its false manifest visible in the cab. She noted the date, the time, the location. She went back to her darkroom that night and developed the images with hands that were steady only because she willed them to be. And when she saw the photographs emerge from the chemicals, clear and damning, she knew she had crossed a line from which there was no safe return. The question now was what to do with what she knew. If she reported it through military channels, the information would reach someone who might be part of the scheme, and evidence had a way of disappearing along with the people who gathered it. If she went public, contacted a newspaper back home, she would be court-martialed for violating security protocols, and her credibility as a woman and a low-ranking enlisted soldier would be destroyed before her evidence was ever examined. She needed someone she could trust, someone with enough rank to be taken seriously, but not so high up that they might already be compromised. She thought of Captain Morrison, the logistics officer who had earned a reputation for being incorruptible, whose strictness made him unpopular, but whose integrity was never questioned. He was stationed 30 miles south, overseeing supply distribution for the entire sector. If anyone would listen, if anyone would act, it would be him. The difficulty was reaching him. She couldn't simply request a meeting without raising questions about why a whack photographer needed to speak with a senior logistics officer. She couldn't send the photographs through mail or courier without risking interception. She needed to deliver the evidence personally, directly, in a way that couldn't be diverted or dismissed. Sarah spent 2 days working out the details. She requested permission to photograph supply operations at the Southern Depot, citing a project on the logistics chain from port to front line. Her captain, still distracted and still dismissive, approved the request. She packed her cameras, her film, and a carefully hidden oilcloth package containing the most damning photographs and her detailed logs. She caught a ride south on a supply truck driven by a corporal she knew slightly, a quiet man from Ohio who asked no questions and appreciated the company. The journey took 4 hours over roads that had been chewed up by tanks and heavy trucks, through villages that showed the scars of recent fighting, past fields where the mud was so deep that vehicles sometimes had to be winched free. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, her precious package secured in her bag, watching the gray landscape roll past and thinking about what she was about to do, about the risk and the necessity and the strange clarity that came from knowing you were doing the only thing possible, even if it might destroy you. Captain Morrison's office was in a converted schoolhouse, the walls still bearing faded educational posters in French, the desks pushed aside to make room for filing cabinets and tactical maps. She arrived in the late afternoon, when the winter light was already fading, and she asked the clerk at the entrance if she could speak with the captain about a documentation project. The clerk, a young private with tired eyes, told her the captain was busy but she could wait. She waited for 2 hours, sitting on a wooden bench in the hallway, listening to the sounds of an army at work, voices and typewriters, and the occasional ring of a telephone. She rehearsed what she would say, how she would present the evidence, how she would convince a man she had never met that what she had discovered was real and urgent and worth the political danger of pursuing it. When Captain Morrison finally emerged from his office, he was younger than she expected, perhaps 40, with the kind of lean efficiency that came from someone who had spent their entire adult life in service. His uniform was immaculate, his expression was stern, and his eyes were the kind that missed nothing. He looked at her, with the brief attention officers typically gave to enlisted soldiers, started to walk past, then stopped. "You're the photographer," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. Corporal Brennan, sir. I need to speak with you about something I've discovered." His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, a subtle attention that suggested he was listening in a way that went beyond polite obligation. "Come into my office." The office was sparse and organized, everything in its place, nothing decorative or personal, except for a single photograph on the desk showing a woman and 2 children. He gestured for her to sit, closed the door, and settled into his chair with the precise movements of someone who did nothing casually. "You have 5 minutes," he said. "Make them count." Sarah opened her bag and placed the oilcloth package on his desk. "Sir, I've been documenting supply operations as part of my photography assignment. I've discovered evidence of systematic theft and black market distribution of military supplies. The evidence includes photographs, manifests, logs, and documented patterns over a 6-week period. I believe the operation involves multiple sergeants and at least 1 officer, possibly more." Morrison's expression remained neutral, but his eyes moved to the package with sharp focus. "That's a serious accusation, Corporal. You understand what you're alleging?" "Yes, sir, I do." He opened the package slowly, methodically, laying out the photographs and documents in careful rows across his desk. He studied each one with the kind of attention that Sarah recognized from her father, the way a true craftsman examined work, looking for truth in details. The minutes stretched out, the office silent except for the rustle of paper and the distant sound of trucks moving in the compound outside. Finally, Morrison looked up at her, and his eyes were different now, harder and also somehow sadder. "You've built a comprehensive case, Corporal. This is professional work. Where did you learn this kind of investigation?" "I learned to see things from my father, sir. He was a mechanic. He taught me that the truth is usually in the details that people overlook." Morrison nodded slowly. "Your father taught you well. This evidence is damning. It's also dangerous. Do you understand that bringing this forward will make you enemies? That there will be people with significant motivation to discredit you or worse?" "Yes, sir. I understand. Why didn't you just ignore it? You could have. You should have. If you were smart." Sarah met his eyes steadily. "Because soldiers are dying because they don't have the supplies that are being stolen and sold, sir. Because this is wrong, and someone needed to document it. I was in a position to do that, so I did." Something that might have been respect flickered across Morrison's face. "All right, Corporal. I'm going to take this evidence, and I'm going to act on it. But I need you to understand something. This investigation is going to take time. It's going to require gathering additional evidence, building a case that can't be dismissed or buried. During that time, you need to continue your normal duties. You cannot tell anyone about this meeting or what you've discovered. If word gets out that you're the source, the people involved in this operation will move to protect themselves, and that protection might include silencing you. Do you understand what I'm saying?" "Yes, sir, I understand." "Good. Return to your unit. Continue your photography work. If anyone asks about this trip, you are documenting supply operations for a comprehensive logistics report. I'll contact you when it's safe to do so. Until then, trust no one." Sarah left his office as the sun was setting, the sky streaked with red and purple, the air sharp with approaching night. She caught a ride back north with a different driver, a sergeant who talked non-stop about his fiancée back in Michigan, and she let his words wash over her without really listening, her mind occupied with what she had done and what might come next. The weeks that followed were among the longest of her life. She returned to her routine work, photographing convoys and soldiers and supply operations, and she watched the black market convoys continue to roll out, with their heavy loads and careful supervision. She wanted to scream at the injustice of it, to confront the sergeants she knew were involved, to do something immediate and visible. But she had made a promise to Morrison, and more importantly, she understood that patience was sometimes the most difficult and most necessary form of courage. 3 weeks after her meeting with Morrison, 2 CID investigators arrived at the compound unannounced. They were quiet men in unmarked uniforms, and they spent 5 days conducting interviews, examining records, and observing operations. Sarah photographed them once, from a distance, documenting their presence as part of her routine work, and their eyes found her across the compound with a look that might have been acknowledgement or warning. 1 week after the investigators left, 6 sergeants and 2 officers were arrested in a coordinated operation that happened so quickly most people didn't realize what was occurring until it was over. The official announcement came the next day, carefully worded, speaking of irregularities in supply distribution and ongoing investigations. There was no mention of black markets or theft, no acknowledgement of the scale or duration of the crimes. The Army protected its reputation, even as it cleaned its house. Captain Morrison sent her a brief message through official channels, thanking her for her documentation of supply operations, and noting that her comprehensive work had proven valuable to logistics planning. It was generic enough to be meaningless to anyone else, but Sarah understood what it really meant. Her evidence had mattered. Her ridiculous angle, her insistence on seeing what others overlooked, had uncovered something her command never wanted public but could no longer ignore. The war continued around her, indifferent to her small victory. Supplies still moved, soldiers still fought, and Sarah still took photographs. But something had changed in her. Something that had to do with understanding that the truth was worth pursuing, even when pursuit was dangerous. that looking from the right angle could reveal what powerful people preferred to keep hidden, that courage sometimes meant being willing to be dismissed as ridiculous until the evidence proved otherwise. Years later, long after the war ended, long after she had returned to Pennsylvania and built a life that had nothing to do with military service, Sarah would sometimes think about those weeks in France. She would remember the weight of the oilcloth package in her hands, the expression on Morrison's face as he studied her evidence, the cold clarity of knowing she was doing something that mattered, even if it might cost her everything. She would remember that the angle nobody wanted was sometimes the angle that revealed the truth, and that being willing to see from that angle, to look when others looked away, was a form of service that had nothing to do with rank or recognition, and everything to do with the quiet insistence that some things were worth the risk of standing alone. The rain had stopped by the time she left France for the last time, the sky clearing to reveal stars so bright and numerous they seemed impossible after months of gray. She stood in the darkness, camera around her neck, and she thought about all the moments she had captured, all the angles she had chosen, all the truths that lived in the space between what people said and what they did. She had learned that the most important photographs were often the ones that showed what others refused to see, that the ridiculous angle was frequently the honest one, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was simply to look, really look, and refuse to turn away from what you found there, no matter how inconvenient or dangerous the truth turned out to be.